Okay, welcome back everyone. Martin Piron, regular, repeat presenter at XWorld, is going to be talking to us about something reasonably new from Apple, is account-driven user enrollment for iOS, which is really exciting. So take it away, Martin.
Thanks, Marcus. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here again. I'm really glad we can help facilitate this event by providing a space. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here, as you said, for second year in a row. So yeah, my name is Martin. I work here at Seek. I'm a senior system engineer. And today we're talking about account-driven user enrollment. And yeah, basically we've just finished setting this up here, and there's definitely a few things we wanna share with you. So before we get into it, I just want to tell you a bit more about Seek so that you understand our organization and maybe why we're making decisions the way we do. So for those that don't know, Seek is a global leader in an employment marketplace. We basically have a platform that's used by about 50 million unique visitors, unique users a month. And we are across a few different territories and countries, so Australia, New Zealand, a lot of Southeast Asia, Brazil, and Mexico. So all that adds up to about 1,300 Macs that we manage and 400 iOS devices. That's about 50% of our fleet. We do have a single client platform team that manage all the platforms, iOS, Apple, Android. So we just want to make sure, Windows of course, we want to make sure that when we make our decisions, we consider all platforms and try to provide the same user experience to everyone. We do have a choose your own device program, which means every employee can just pick whichever platform and device they would do the best work on. So yeah, account-driven user enrollment. Why do we need to talk about it today, and why did we turn it on? Well, basically because security wanted to turn on device trust. And we're doing device trust through Okta Verify. So the way it works is if you've got the Okta Verify app installed on a device and you're trying to do an authentication, it will run some checks and balances and make sure that the device can be considered trusted and get access to your corporate data. So the things it checks is like, yeah, OS version, passcode, encryption, if you've got a specific device certificate or maybe a secret key. So we want to do this while keeping our core ideologies in mind here at Seek. So simplicity, privacy, transparency. We really want to make this as seamless as possible while having everyone's best interest in mind. And as I mentioned before, we want to do this in a platform agnostic way. So we want to provide as close as possible experience on Android as we can on iOS, which is why we've decided to use Android work profile for Android, and on iOS we've gone for account-driven user enrollment.
So your staff have their own phones, they're not company phones?
We've got a mix of both. So yeah, we've got corporate phones, but because we're now turning on device trust, we need to be able to enable our staff to still access corporate-owned data on their personal devices if they choose so. So, account-driven enrollment has actually been around for a couple of years now. Why do we need a session about it now? Turns out the adoption has been quite low, and that's probably because of the complexity of it. The barrier of entry is actually quite high. We do have some documentation, but it's not always available and it's not always fully documented, so it can become quite messy actually. And in an environment like ours, which is quite large and complex, it can be quite painful, let's be honest. So for device trust to work, we need to have some level of management on the device to be able to push a managed version of Okta Verify. So for corporate-owned device, automated device enrollment is obviously the default and the logical choice. We used to have user-initiated enrollment, but we've actually turned it off now and only really use it for certain edge cases, but there hasn't been any in the last few months. So for BYO, we do have two options. We could turn on user-initiated enrollment back on and make it widely available again and go down that path. But it's quite an intrusive management mechanism, and we want it to be as respectful as possible of the user's privacy. So for us, account-driven user enrollment was the logical choice. It's a modern solution that gives us the level of management we need without intruding on the user's devices any more than we have to. So where to start? Well, there is some existing documentation, and there is a great session from JNUC last year that I would highly recommend you to check out if you're thinking about doing this. Now, because that session exists, I don't want to go through every step because that's quite well covered in that. I sort of want to do a companion piece to it. So some of my points will be quite quick, and I will need to speed up through a few steps because there are a lot of them. So just like that session, if you're familiar with it, you might need to maybe check the recording of this one later down the road and hit the pause button every now and then to actually digest everything that you see on the screen. Okay, so as a high overview, there's three things you need to do for account-driven user enrollment to work. You need a well-known JSON file on your public website. You need managed Apple IDs, and you need to configure your MDM. First thing first, the JSON file. And this is basically the end result that you want to get to. It's actually reasonably straightforward if you have one domain. If you have one domain and a simple environment, you might be able to get this done fairly quickly. Now, just keep in mind that this has to be a direct response. It cannot be a 301, it cannot be a redirection or any of those things. It needs to be, straight up, basically exactly like you see it on screen. Now, unfortunately for us, we don't have one domain, we have quite a few. And so you really need to do this for every domain that you've got a UPN attached to it. So the good news is that all our domains are managed through Cloudflare, but unfortunately not all of them are managed by the same team and in the same way. So on top of that, those teams usually use CI/CD pipeline and infrastructure as code to run all the management on these. So while you should be able to go on Cloudflare and click your way around to figure this out, we couldn't. So it added quite a bit of complexity. We ended up having to use 3 different Cloudflare features that I'm going to go through in a second. Just one thing to keep in mind is that you need to terminate your SSL traffic to Cloudflare. It's quite important. And if you need to test this, you basically need to pass the query string that you're seeing there on screen. So it's quite good to get that one if you need to troubleshoot and figure out if things are working the way they should. So let's talk about the JSON file. We decided to host it on S3 because it's a pretty popular place to do that, but yeah, feel free to use whatever you feel like using. If you do decide to use S3, you need to follow this exact same path as you're seeing here, because Cloudflare only redirects to the first slash, so you need to be very specific here with the character and everything. And as you can notice here, we've actually had to remove the .json from the file, which means you need to specify through metadata that it's actually a JSON content. Now, once you've done that, you need to point to it. So again, we've used 3 different methods in Cloudflare. The first one is origin rules. So you basically set it up and direct your traffic to the S3 bucket. And that works quite well. Just keep in mind that for this to work, you need to be on a business or an enterprise account. It does not work on a free one. Another method is page rules. Page rules works quite well. Just keep in mind that you have to pair it with a DNS record. And page rules are actually a legacy feature that is now being replaced by origin routes. So keep that in mind, and also remember that this, just like origin routes, is only accessible on a paid account. So if you're on a free account, you might want to use this, which is worker routes. So Cloudflare workers, the way it works is you map a worker to a URL pattern, and when the request comes through Cloudflare, it matches that pattern and executes the worker. And that works quite well, and it definitely works on a free account. So feel free to steal that if you need. Next, managed Apple IDs. Now, before you start, I would strongly recommend you to go through these few steps to make your life a lot easier down the road. First, Apple Business Manager admin account can be on a managed Apple ID, but not a federated one. So I would strongly advise you to make sure you do that before you start, to not lose access to the console. And this is where a distribution list, for example, might be very useful as an email, so that, especially for service accounts, so that you can do recovery with multiple members of your team. Same for your APNS cert accounts. Again, non-federated mail is the best way to do it. On this one, you don't need any admin rights or anything like that. So yeah, you can just have a non-federated mail for the cert. And if you need help with migrating your existing cert to this new account, you can contact your Apple Enterprise support and you can actually migrate that. Now, for App Store Connect account holders, the best would be to use a reasonably generic email on a non-federated account. And I will cover why in a few slides. Now, once you've done all that, user comes. Because unfortunately for us, for years, we were telling our staff to create an Apple ID on their work email to download apps on their work phones. So we knew that we would have plenty of conflicts to deal with when we turn on federation. So for those of you that don't know, when you turn on federation in ABM, Apple will scan any existing Apple IDs on those domains and will basically contact those users to give them 60 days to resolve the conflict, mentioning that the domain is being reclaimed, you need to migrate out. They do all the communications, you actually don't have much control over it, you just know it's a 60-day deadline for all of that to happen. So basically what you want to do is communicate to all your users to let them know that these emails are going to come through, because what you really don't want to happen is one of them to hit the spam button and basically blacklist that email for the whole company. So the hardest thing is really to communicate the change to our users. Clicking around in ABM, it's reasonably easy. You can get that done in a few minutes or hours. But the communication, that took weeks, months. We actually got help from organization change management. They assigned a couple of PM and BAs to us so that we could send comms through every channel we could think of: weekly newsletter, intranet, Slack channel. We joined some leadership meetings to give them the information directly, hoping that it will trickle down and everything. So yeah, that's very important, because at least for us, there was just so many of them. Federation. For a long time, managed Apple IDs seem to be a bit of a gimmick, but it really sounds like now Apple wants to start using them a lot more. So even if you don't think you'll ever need account-driven user enrollment, I still recommend to turn on federation and start using managed Apple IDs. And to use managed Apple IDs, technically you don't need federation, but realistically you don't want to have to create all those managed Apple IDs manually. So federation is definitely key here. And it also protects you in terms of impersonation, because let's go back of one of those users that created an Apple ID 5 years ago and then left the company. Well, technically, they still own that Apple ID. So they could use that on iMessage or on FaceTime to contact users and pretend to still be working for SIG. So it could become, a bit of a privacy issue or something like that. So again, we had to do federation for all our domains. We've got heaps of them. It took a little while, but we got there eventually. I'm not going to go over the whole process because it's quite well documented. What I do want to mention is this one. When we tried to federate one of our domain, turns out somebody else already was. And what happened actually is that about 4 years ago, one of our service desk members in Hong Kong decided to register for ABM and just federate the domain without really telling anyone, without documenting it, without recording the credentials. So we were kind of stuck quite quickly there in the process. So what we had to do there is, again, engage with Apple Enterprise support to try to figure out what happened there. But for those of you that know Apple, you know that privacy is key with them. They won't just give you the account and the credentials. So what we had to do is do some email interception, in our case using Proofpoint, to get the incoming traffic from Apple into our mail servers to figure out which email address they were sending the recovery email to, so that we could figure out what account that was, go through a recovery process. It was a whole story. It was, it took about 10 days, so all things considered not that long, but it was still a bit of a bump in the road there. So talking about proof point and email interception, this is actually a great trick for you if you want to figure out how many of your conflicts and accounts are still being used. Because when we turned on federation, we got all the reports and we had about 1,000 conflicts. So again, for privacy reasons, Apple won't give you a list of those emails, but if you can intercept your traffic, and if it's not proof point, it could be Exchange Online or any other mechanism that you have. If you use those two email addresses that you see on the screen, you can try to work things out. So with the first one, with the Apple ID, at apple.com, you can see the email going out to say, hey, we're reclaiming the domain, you need to do something with your Apple ID. And with the second email, the UAT one, that's when you get the confirmation to say, yep, your Apple ID has been migrated. So by running the logs on both of them, you can say how many active accounts you still have, and for us it was about 50%, and how many people actually migrated, which was about 20% of that. So yeah, just something to keep in mind, and quite a nice little trick if you want to follow things up. Now, at the end of the 60 days, we were still stuck with about 20 errors. And again, if you did what I mentioned a few slides ago with migrating all your account across, maybe you won't have any, but we didn't, so we did. So yeah, fortunately, all of those were for service accounts that were manually created in ABM on now a federated domain. So we ended up deleting pretty much all of them and recreating new ones using distribution list or things like that on a non-federated domain. But if you do get stuck, for example, with this one with James Corcoran that couldn't be here with us today, he's double booked him on holiday. If you actually do get stuck like that, if you're trying to fix it through the ABM console, it's not going to work. You'll get some errors and you won't be able to actually save the changes. But if you do go on appleid.apple.com, that actually works, and then you can change the email address that's tied to it and start your recovery process. So again, nice little trick if you do get stuck in this position. So we've got managed Apple IDs. Great, but they actually don't work for everything. They work for a fair bit. So developer account, test flight, App Store Connect, all that is absolutely fine with a managed Apple ID. But there's two things that you really cannot use them with. As I mentioned earlier, ABM admin, it can be managed, but not federated. But the big one here is your account holder for either App Store Connect or the developer portal. Because these accounts need billing details, which you cannot have on a MAID. And these also cannot be a service account, a distribution list, or anything like that, because those account holders actually sign contracts on behalf of the company with Apple. So Apple actually does some ID check in the background. So the account needs to be tied to an individual staff of the company, hence the user add non-federated domain email if you can. So all this was great. And we did all this federation and everything with Entra. But then while we were in the process of doing that, we got accepted into the Okta beta for federation on ABM, which is great. So we tried to migrate and to do that, but it turns out you can't do it while you have conflict resolution in progress. So we had to wait for 60 days to be over to be able to turn it off, move to Okta, and turn it back on. So again, not a deal breaker, but we just didn't know about it. So we just kept hitting and having to delay our program and our whole process here because we kept hitting those hurdles. But once you do it, it's actually reasonably straightforward. It took us about 90 minutes. Now, as far as I'm concerned, right now, I believe it is still in beta. Now, the Okta documentation is actually quite good, but there is a big, giant legal warning on it to say, this is a beta, do not share with anyone. So I can't share that with you. But I have found someone that did. So if you want to follow that QR code, someone, not me, just decided to put all that documentation online. And again, it's reasonably straightforward, and I'm guessing when we get out of beta, it's going to be shared widely. So yeah, the trick here really is that you want to go into your Okta admin, create a new app, and set up OIDC with it. And when you do that, you need to turn on shared signals. There's a feature flag called SSF transmitters that you need to be able to do the whole federation with ABM. And right now, in beta, that feature flag can only be enabled by your Okta product team. So that's how they gatekeep that feature for now. But once you do, it is reasonably straightforward. This step was quite interesting because at some stage, you follow the assistant, and at some stage you need to log on to the Okta admin with an Okta admin account. And I was trying to do that from my computer. But on my computer, I already have Okta Verify, and I already have a session token with my standard account. So we were going into a loop, and it was just not working as expected. So if you have to do this, and you also have Okta Verify and all that happening, I would strongly recommend you to use a VM or remote machine to just do the setup through ABM. Eventually, when you do, you get a green tick, and everybody's happy. Now, surprisingly, even though we just had gone through the 60-day and the conflict resolution and everything, we still had some conflict bugs. Only 5 accounts, not a big deal, but still unexpected. We couldn't find any proof point traffic for it either, so we're just assuming that there's phantom accounts and that eventually they're going to go away and we don't need to worry about them. One good news, though, is when you do federate with Okta, for those of you that are familiar with it, when you federate with Entra and you want to, for each account that you federate, you need to go and click the button and sign in with an account on the same domain that matches, and it's a bit of a pain if you've got so many domains to do. Well, fortunately, with Okta, you don't. The second you've got Okta, you can just tick all the buttons. You don't need to do any more tokens, verifications, or login. So it's a bit more straightforward. Now that federation is enabled, well, we need to get these mates created. Now, by default, ABM will do that, and it will do just-in-time account creation, which works great for any Mac or iOS users because they can just go in and log on and create the mate. But that cannot be created through the web, and it cannot be created on a Windows device. So unfortunately for our marketing, sales, and finance people that decided to stick on Windows, well, they might still need access to the App Store Connect data to get the reportings and all that. So they can't just create a managed Apple ID. So this is why Skim or directory sync is quite useful. As the name mentions, you just set it up and it will automatically sync your domain with ABM and create an Apple ID for every member of your company. So pretty straightforward. It does not generate an email when the email is created, so you don't need to worry about spamming everyone, telling them we created an Apple ID for you, even though you might never use it. If the account gets disabled on your domain, it will be deactivated on ABM and deleted 30 days later. So pretty straightforward. The one thing that, as far as I know, is not possible right now with Skim is account renaming. So if somebody gets married or divorced and their name change, the account will not get updated. As far as I know, it will create a new account and there's no migration path. So it's not great, and I really wish that feature was available as soon as possible because we are thinking of moving all of our users to a unified seek.com domain. And if we were to do that, we just have to throw everything at the door and start fresh. So we might wait until that feature comes around. Okay, once you've done all that, we need now to configure your MDM, and in our case, Jamf Pro. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because there's nothing really special about it and it's quite well documented. There's just a few points I want to cover. First one is, well, of course, you're going to go into your settings and you're going to turn on Account-Driven User Enrollment, which is great. But for that to work, you first need to assign the Jamf app to all your users in Okta. And if you do that, you might want first to review your Jamf admin portal access because you don't want to give all of them access to the portal, obviously. Similar things with user-initiated enrollment. Now, we do have turned it on because we do want that managed local administrator created during pre-stage. And for a long time, this wasn't an issue because the Jamf app was only assigned to Jamf admins. But now, technically, any of our users could go to that URL and enroll their personal devices. Not really something we want, but we can't really turn it off either. So what we ended up doing was creating some alerts anytime a computer gets enrolled through UIE, and we also reviewed all our policies and basically excluded any computer enrolled through UIE from our policies. Another thing that it took me a couple of go to remember where to do this is like for account-driven user enrollment devices, the VPP license is assigned on a user base, not on a device base. And I never go into the user section of Jamf, let's be honest. But if you want to assign the licensing, that's where you have to go. So just a friendly reminder there. In terms of config profile, we kept it super simple. One config profile, 2 restrictions. And for a long time, it was just the 1 restriction. The bottom one is fairly new, as you would know. We started with a lot more than them. We started basically through going the CIS benchmark for BYOD, manage copy and paste, manage passcode, and all of that. But we realized that again, because most of our users are already using their phone, they already have, the migration process was just not great, and it was actually quite a bad user experience. So we decided to read it all back and just basically enforce this pretty obvious restrictions for untrusted TLS certificates, because at the end of the day, Okta Verify will be the gatekeeper here. So it's your personal device. If you don't want a passcode on your personal device, that's on you. You should, but you don't have to. Just keep in mind that if you don't have a passcode on your device, Okta Verify will consider you untrusted, and you won't get access to corporate details, corporate data, and that's about it. Talking about Okta Verify, for this to work, so the managed version that you're pushing out needs to have that client secrets in it. So nothing crazy there. Just one issue that comes with it, though, is that you do actually have to reinstall it. So we have to assume that all our users already have Okta Verify on their phone because they use it for MFA right now. But for device trust to work, they then have to enroll into BYO, delete the app, re-download it from self-service with the client secret, and then reassign all the accounts. So there's no way around it. It's just the way it is. And it's a pretty poor user experience, but there's no way around it, full stop. Now, thankfully, you can do the scan QR code from the Okta Verify on your desktop to migrate the account a bit easily and things like that, but it's still not great. And because there's no EMM or for enterprise version of the app, well, we just don't have any other options. So this is where Android is actually better, let's be honest. The Android work profile, where you can install the same app twice, is actually, as far as we're concerned, a better user experience in this case. Let me come to this. So, yeah, was it worth it? Well, at the end of the day, yes. Yes, it was. Because as far as we're concerned, we know which device is accessing our data, and we know we can revoke those rights if we need to, and we can monitor for basic security posture, OS encryption, version, things like that. Okta Verify, unfortunately, will happily authenticate an unmanaged version of an app. Okta Verify doesn't understand the concept of managed or unmanaged app. So there is no way for us to force people into those managed apps. The way to do it would be to set up app VPN and do a lot of IP whitelisting and configuration on the back end. We have about 250 apps in Okta, so it would be a lot of work. Again, the user experience would be quite painful. And so we just decided not to do it. For now, we're happy with what we got. Now, technically, maybe for new employees, this would be okay and a bit more manageable, but we want, again, a single experience for all our users. So for now, we're happy with this. Maybe down the road, if EMM comes available for either Okta Verify or others like, hopefully this is still the beginning. For now, we're happy with this. We'll see where we land.
Assuming when they replace their devices, it would be nicer next time as well.
Replacing device, yes and no. Yeah, I've got stories about that if you want to. It's like, because our devices used to be managed by Telstra, and now we're bringing them into management into Jamf. So yeah, for new device or refresh, it's very easy. But if you're actually trying to migrate a device from AirWatch to Jamf while keeping all the data, which means backup, restore, I've got stories. But yeah, that's actually it for me. Thanks for sticking with it. Yeah, any questions?
I saw you.
Yeah, I know. He was looking for other people.
You quickly flashed up there about people enrolling devices into Jamf, just personally owned devices, and you've set up a rule because you turned on user enrollment, but they could potentially enroll their manual device. Have you looked at the SSO settings which let you limit it to certain groups?
Yep, and there's a PI logged for that as well because for some reason there's a bug.
Oh, and it wasn't
not working.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I ran into that too. I want to enable people to enroll devices, but only if they're in a specific group.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right now, in our specific environment with whatever IDP we're using, and something is not working as it's supposed to be, which is why setting up those alerts was the way to go.
Did you look at both the Access tab and the SSO settings?
I believe we did, but I'm happy to review that with you later
because I looked at the Access and I was like, I thought it's great. It wasn't working.
Yeah.
It's like you got to define it in two places.
Let's have a chat after this. That would be really good news. I mean, fortunately, not many people know the URL to go to, so yeah, it hasn't happened yet, but yeah.
I think I've set this up in testing, so it was really interesting, the well-known file. That was the bit that kind of stumped me, because I've just got a personal website for doing testing and stuff. That well-known file was one of the hardest steps, because if you just got a basic WordPress website that you're going to do this to, a lot of web vendors wouldn't let you touch that file. So even though you may have cPanel access, you're actually not allowed to put stuff in there. So the whole kind of DNS, Cloudflare, I actually end up changing my provider just because I got another provider. I can't remember who I was with, but I was like, just change my provider. Like my website is literally a blank Lipsum Orium template just to do some stuff. So that having that knowledge as well, those basic for a smaller company that may want to do this, it's key. That file is so key. And if you're not using, or a big company using Cloudflare or some of the other tactics, like that knowledge was, it took me quite a while to work that out.
Yeah.
So.
I think it took us about 6 weeks to get all of our domains covered. The good news is that you don't need to do this in sequence. Like you can literally work across everything I've talked today, like the same time. Like it doesn't have to be a waterfall.
Did you have any issues with users deleting personal Apple IDs?
Oh yes, I must have. Yeah. So yeah, that was in my note. I must have skipped over it. So yeah, when they get the email from Apple, giving them 60 days to migrate the Apple ID, if they decide to go through and hit delete instead of ignore or migrate, that Apple ID is gone forever. And even through federation, even through MAID, it can never be recreated. So again, communicating to telling them, hey, please don't hit the delete button is quite useful, because I think we only had it with 2 users, but if these 2 wants to enroll their personal devices, they just don't have an Apple ID. We would have to manually create one for them. There's a way around it.
Well, they change their name is the easiest way.
Feedback on that issue?
I definitely logged a ticket with them saying this is ridiculous, but then privacy, because the thing is that if they could restore that, you'd restore all the purchase history and all of that. So yeah, from a privacy reason, I get it.
It's just they should get a delete option. If you want the domain, it should just get renamed automatically to something else.
I agree, but I also get it.
The way I take it is, at that point, it's a personal Apple ID. The terms and conditions of that personal Apple ID are between the user and Apple. It doesn't matter what domain they use. Once it's a managed Apple ID, then the organization, well, it's never a managed Apple ID if it's a managed Apple ID.
I think the terms of service that Apple says they can't rename their Apple ID.
Have you read the terms of service?
We ended up telling them, if you're not sure, just let it expire. We can always recover it later. But yeah.
Any more questions? All right. Thank you very much. And once again, thank you so much to Seek for this amazing venue. I know it's been wonderful here. So, thank you for everything you've done
Pleasure.
to put this on and to put this presentation together.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.